radiation, which harms cellular growth and development in the testes. The idea is that these laboratory-grown sterile insects will mate with wild females, producing eggs that will never hatch. Because most females mate only once in their life, this method could substantially decrease mosquito populations. In a separate UN-supported project run by the Tropical Medicine Research in Sudan, lab workers are mass-producing sterile mosquitoes, the most prevalent malaria vector in the country, with a special rearing device for future release. The project is still at the testing stage, but there is reason to be optimistic. In the early 1950s, American entomologist Edward Kipling set out to use the same approach, known simply as sterile insect technique, with the New World screwworm fly, a pest that lays eggs on wounds in livestock and humans that later hatch into flesh-eating maggots. It took decades, but by 2006, the screwworm fly had been eliminated from North and Central America, saving livestock industry billions of dollars a year. Similarly, sterilization offers the possibility of near-permanent area-wide solution to the mosquito problem with minimal ongoing maintenance work. Yet, it requires a lot of organization and infrastructure without much possibility of financial profit. Therefore, it has mostly been explored by governments rather than by private enterprise. Private companies, energized by new interest in mosquito control following the Zika crisis, are hoping that a different type of sterilization effort will prove to be faster, easier, and more thorough way to take out mosquitoes. These schemes, scientists manipulate the genetics of the bugs themselves. For example, to help Brazil get rid of the mosquitoes that transmit dengue and Zika, a private company called Oxitec has been releasing genetically engineered mosquitoes into the wild mosquitoes that have been bred in the lab to pass on a gene that kills female offspring. The genetically altered mosquitoes go on to mate with wild mosquitoes, rapidly spreading the trait to a population. During an experimental release of these lab-grown mosquitoes in a suburb of the city of Jacaré in northeastern Brazil, a number of the mosquitoes there fell by 95% within 9 months. 2 other Brazilian cities have also reported success with the mosquitoes, but this work remains controversial, and critics say that there are lingering questions about the unintended environmental consequences. Genetically driven sterilization efforts could take years to work on any significant scale, but there is another option. Researchers at Imperial College London contend that we should employ gene drive tools to quickly push specific genetic changes through the mosquito population. The best way to control malaria, they explain, is to use gene editing tools such as CRISPR to introduce a specific gene into individual bugs and then drive that change through an entire population. The CRISPR editing system is encoded into an embryonic insect's DNA, ensuring that the trait is preferentially passed on to its offspring. Theoretically, after many generations, the entire population will have that gene, overriding the natural rules of inheritance, which sexually producing organisms have a 50-50 chance of inheriting the gene from each of their parents because scientists make the desired change on both chromosomes. For malaria control, that altered genetic information could change either the mosquitoes that would not transmit malaria, disrupt the sex ratio in the next generation, or simply kill the next generation of bugs. There are clear similarities to the radiation and gene-based sterile insect technique, but gene drive would potentially work with far fewer mosquitoes releases because the modified genes would spread throughout the population within several generations of its introduction. Yet gene drive, too, is also controversial because of concerns about unforeseen consequences. As a result, thus far no community field trials have gotten the green light. Some scientists who work in the field have also said that the wild mosquito population will develop resistance to gene drives over time, something that has already occurred in lab experiments and could ultimately render this approach ineffective. Such resistance could arise in a number of ways, and one, natural genetic variation could alter the short genetic sequence that the gene drive systems would otherwise target. Alternatively, cellular repair processes may alter DNA sequences so that a gene drive system can no longer recognize them. The danger of reintroduction. Eliminating all mosquitoes is a fantasy. In the U.S., the most effective abatement districts spend from $1 to $10 per person per year to spray insecticides, remove standing water, and clear mosquito-friendly vegetation. Yet, even that does not completely get rid of them. Killing all mosquitoes could also disrupt food chains and plant pollinations in ways we do not even suspect. Besides, only a couple of hundred of these 3,500 mosquito species scientists have identified bite humans and carry diseases, so it would also be overzealous to obliterate them all. The best we could hope for, and probably the only option that would not be environmentally safe, would be to eliminate some of the key species from specific areas. I believe we could achieve that. In Haiti, for example, perhaps we could kill off the main malaria-transmitting species with sterile male technique while protecting people against other disease-carrying mosquito species with effective eave tubes and sugar bait traps. We would also need to preemptively monitor human patients and the local mosquito population for signs of emerging threats and tamp down any small outbreaks that may arise. With such comprehensive strategies, it is not unimaginable that within 5 years the parasites that cause malaria would be gone from the entire island. Even then, however, there would still be the danger of reintroduction. History demonstrates that if a ship of infected people arrives in a previously disease-free area, or worse, mosquito species capable of carrying the disease from Africa or Southwest Asia, maladies such as malaria can resurface. Although the widespread trend has been to free countries from malaria, there are at least 68 documented examples of resurgence of the disease in communities following a reduction in mosquito control. The Aegypti mosquito managed to make a comeback in Brazil in the 1980s after DDT spraying ceased there, for example. As a result, dengue and yellow fever reappeared in the nation, and chikungunya and Zika virus cropped up too. When DDT spraying stopped in India because of shortages of the chemical and other factors, malaria returned there as well. We have never had so much innovation or funding in the area of mosquito control. Private foundations such as ours, government agencies, and the World Health Organization are collectively spending about $570 million annually on dedicated malaria research, whereas in 2002, the annual spending levels were closer to $100 million. But even with the aid of new tools, mosquito control requires constant vigilance. Mosquito problems are seldom solved permanently and must be attended to constantly, just like any other health hazard. And from the summer 2018 issue of Popular Science, sugar high. Carbon emissions are sucking the life out of our food. Any middle schooler grokks the fundamental of photosynthesis. Fueled by sunlight, plants turn carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen, which they use to grow stems, roots, leaves, and other tasty bits. As CO2 levels continue to rise, and we're on track to double pre-industrial levels in the next few decades, it might sound like we're in for a vegetational boom. But any greenery growth spurt will come with a downside. CO2-charged sprouts contain more starches and sugars and fewer minerals and proteins. You can try to avoid junk through food, but our plants are getting junkier too. See, plants also require proteins in order to grow, which they synthesize using elements they draw from the soil, such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. In the course of sucking up those molecules, greens also take in nutritious materials, such as zinc and iron. Plants often absorb more than they need, storing the excess in their cells. Then humans get to eat them. Agronomists, however, have recorded a steady decline in some of those minerals, proteins, and vitamins for half a century. For example, the USDA data shows that kale from 1999 had 23% less iron than in the 1950s. Historically, scientists have blamed industrial farming for practices like overworking soil, which strips off the good stuff. But now the blame is shifting to include CO2. In 2002, mathematician Ikerli Deleuze theorized that photosynthesis requires few proteins as CO2 climbs, which means plants require few incidental micronutrients while sucking them up, skewing the ratio of healthy to unhealthy content. He recorded an 8% nutrient drop, on average, in certain kinds of crops, including rice and wheat. In 2014, Lola Dez and another group of scientists both published research lending weight to his earlier hypothesis. Two studies drew upon more than a decade of study of data from agronomists who had planted 41 varieties of 6 food groups: wheat, maize, sorghum, field peas, soybeans, and rice, and surrounded part of each field with nozzles blasting enough CO2 to warm any greenhouse. Analysis of the harvest showed that maize and sorghum fared fine, but rice, a staple for half of humanity, lost about 3% of its zinc, which could put hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people at risk of deficiency, leaving them more vulnerable to respiratory diseases, diarrhea, and malaria. This has been David Murphy. Thank you very much for listening to me.
You've just heard the Talking Information Center's presentation of Popular Science and Popular Mechanics magazines. We hope you enjoyed this program and that you'll stay tuned for more coming your way next.
This is an announcement for listeners of the Massachusetts Reading Network. If you are located on Cape Cod or within the surrounding areas and are interested in listening to your local newspapers, the Talking Information Center is making them available on its website. There are just a few simple steps to follow. Please call the Talking Information Center at 781 1-834-4400, and we would be happy to assist you. Again, for more information about accessing your local Cape Area newspapers on the Talking Information Center's website, please call 781-834-4400. We look forward to hearing from you.
I'm more resourceful than I thought.
My suit can still make an impression.
My video games are still game changers.
And my lamp can bring others a bright future.
Because when I donate my stuff to Goodwill,
it helps fund job placement and training for people right in my community.
Now my stuff gets a second chance.
And will give someone in my community
a second chance too.
Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs. Find your nearest donation center at goodwill.org. That's goodwill.org. This message brought to you by Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod to the Berkshires.
This is volunteer reader Jeff Van Amberg broadcasting from Worcester, Massachusetts. Stay tuned for more coming your way next.
WRRS Middleborough, Pittsfield, WVBF Middleborough, WDJM Framingham, WUML Lowell, WLLO Londonderry.
Coming up next, the Talking Information Center proudly presents The Ability Show. Please stay tuned.
Hello, this is Kathleen, and today I'll be reading to you from TIC's Ability Program. Eric Hoke, The Man, by Ian Reuter. Eric Hoke misses his dog and the Seattle home they share. As the guitarist for hit band Portugal, the man Hoke has been on the go so much for the past 18 months he has barely had time to see either. In fact, he has spent so much time on the road that the Uber app on his phone is convinced he lives in the Line Hotel in Los Angeles. Hoke estimates that between concerts, media bookings, and other gigs, he has made more than 365 appearances all over the world in the last year alone. Among the highlights, the band brought the house down with a performance at last November's American Music Awards and then surprised even themselves when they won Best Pop Duo Performance at the 60th Annual Grammy Awards in January. Such is the life of a rock star. And after a whirlwind year, they saw the band skyrocket from indie sensation to mainstream success. That is exactly what Hoke 36 has become. It is a life Hoke has stubbornly pursued since he was a teenage guitar prodigy in Wasilla, Alaska. Not so much the Grammy and the fame, but making music and touring the world with friends. It's a damn good life. Even when it's terrible, it's all right, he says. It would be easy to marvel at how Hoke accomplished this despite sustaining a spinal cord injury in 2007. But after talking to him and the people who know him, the more interesting story may be that no one ever really doubted he would. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've undoubtedly heard Hoke's riffs on One of Portugal. The man's two smash hits, Feel It Still and Live in the Moment, with a throwback rock vibe and the catchiest chorus of the year. Feel It Still quickly became the earworm of 2017, finding its way into ads for everything from Apple to vitamin water en route to going double platinum and reaching #1 on 6 of the major airplay charts. Live in the Moment followed that success by hitting #1 on the Billboard Alternative chart and breaking the record for the most plays in a week. This level of success was new for Portugal. The man and for Hawk, who joined the band in 2015 with a rotating cast of musicians led by singer John Gorley and bassist Zach Carruthers. Portugal, the man, has built a loyal following over 7 albums and 11 years, but never really reached the mainstream. Hoke grew up with Gurley and Carruthers in Wasilla, Alaska, and was talking with them about joining in 2007 when everything changed. We had just got pretty close again, and he was about to join our band, and then suddenly the accident happened, said Carruthers. Hoke was sitting against a wall in a friend's yard when the wall collapsed. He fell 12 feet and ended up with a T4 spinal cord injury. While the injury unofficially tabled the discussions about joining Portugal, the man, there were all signs around that did little to slow his musical momentum. Before Hoke even started rehab at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, an impromptu visit from some of his friends led to what was perhaps the first recording session conducted in a major trauma center. I knew they were coming by to visit. I did not know they were going to bring a small recording studio into my room, he says, but they did. At this point, I haven't even sat up yet for longer than 10 or 15 seconds without getting all lightheaded and passing out. I've still got a neck collar and I'm fully hooked up. I think I had a nurse take out a couple of IVs because they were making noise on the mics. I had strummed around and messed around on some guitars before that point, but that was definitely a trial by fire. Other than the brief moment when he woke up in the middle of his spinal cord surgery, Hoke was always confident that playing the guitar would remain a central part of his life. And this just confirmed it. After my injury, I knew I had hands, he said. And if I didn't have my hands, I'd work my way up to being a world premier slide guitarist or something. I would figure something out. Hoke learned to sit slightly off-kilter to maintain his floppy balance while playing, and often rolls without his chair's right armrest to accommodate the body of his guitar. It's like so many things, there is a period of adapting and a good measure of stubbornness that comes along with that. But if you set out in your life to do something, and when something happens, it is up to you to make that sort of non-issue and find a way around it. His next trial by fire came 4 months later when he played on stage for the first time. His band, The Lashes, had a long-booked gig at Bumbershoot, Seattle's premier music festival. In typical fashion, Hoke played down the fact he got back in the swing of things so quickly. Well, no one ever asked me if I wanted to cancel, he says. Despite the success, the Lashes were coming to an end. Everyone looked around and took an inventory and said, nah, I don't think we want to do another 60-day tour in a van that's not running great, with no prospects of climbing our way out of it, he recalls. But I wanted that. With a huge network of friends and connections in the music industry, Hoke had no trouble finding bands to tour with after rehabbing. Taking advantage of his self-described truck driver's soul, he drove himself all over between gigs to feed his musical compulsion. At the same time, back in Seattle, he got involved behind the scenes, joining an ownership group that bought and refreshed the Crocodile, a famed Seattle music venue. The Crocodile had won over Seattle music fans thanks to shows by Nirvana, Pearl Jam, R.E.M., and many more. But it held even more significance for Hoke. All of my firsts were there, he said. I played all of my first big shows at the Crocodile. My early bands opened for the Strokers and the Libertines back in the day. It's really my first place I learned how to manipulate my ID so I looked like I was 21. When Hoke saw a sign in the window announcing the 2007 closure, he started asking around to see if anything was stirring. Marcus Charles was part of a group looking for investors with local connections. When he met Hoke, he knew he'd found his man. Eric has always had credibility in the music scene. Before and after he got hurt, he says, I was really impressed by him and wanted him to be involved. The fact that Hoke was only months removed from his injury didn't faze Charles at all. He's the ultimate explorer, trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life and where he wants to go. He's always up for an adventure and trying new things, he says. I think that's rare to find in human beings. Hoke's exploration didn't stop there. In 2011, Hoke partnered up with another group to start The Forge, a bar on Seattle's up-and-coming waterfront. Like Charles, investor Mike Ager instantly hit it off with Hoke, knowing he had found an ideal partner. Hoke's connections were appealing, but it was his personality that sealed the deal. He infectiously positive about everything. You don't ever see him get down or bummed out, said Ager. Whatever crisis there is or hassle, he has this very sort of calming presence. He can be the mediator and take in everyone's ideas and positions and then articulate them and come up with solutions that everybody can get along with. Longtime friend Nathaniel Bradford was the one who introduced Hoke to Ager. He seconded all of Ager's comments, highlighting Hoke's intelligence and selflessness. He just makes everything make sense, said Bradford. I think we are all so close to business that we exist with our heads in our own asses a lot of the time. And what Eric brings to this is just like, hey, I know you guys are doing this and you guys are doing that, but here's a little bit of how the actual world works. He brings a little perspective without any ego, working towards being a better good for everyone. He's just so effing capable in every way, shape, and form. Buoyed by their success, 5 years later, the group opened the Sovereign, another bar, less than a mile away. Hope describes the Forge as somewhere between Cheers and the bar from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, while the Sovereign has a slightly more refined feel. For Hoke, opening a part of the bars fulfilled another childhood dream. It's the clubhouse. Who doesn't want to own a bar? If I go back in time and tell my 12-year-old me that this is what you're going to be doing, he'd be like, yeah. The same enthusiasm was on display when Hoke rekindled talks about joining Portugal the Man with Carruthers and Gorley in 2015. He had jammed with us whenever we were in the same place, whenever we'd play Seattle, or when we were at the same festival, recalls Carruthers. And we always wanted him in the band, but he was always in so many other bands. All of that experience had given Hoke the confidence that he needed to persuade Carruthers and Gorley. On paper, being a part of a major touring band seemed really hard, said Carruthers. I would talk to Eric and he'd be like, every day is different. Some days are really easy, some days are really hard. There are a lot of things that don't look like you can do them, but you just figure it out. With that, we just decided to go for it. I snuck in there, Hoke says with a smile. I peeked in under the radar. Once officially in the band, all theoretical discussions about access obstacles became real. At the top of the list are inaccessible venues and transportation. It is impossible to find an ADA accessible tour bus, said Carruthers. Like they don't exist. That makes for some interesting nights on the road when the band's between gigs. I've got to cliffhanger my way around, said Hoke, citing the movie where Sylvester Stallone plays a mountain climber tasked with taking down the bad guys. Because scooting my way on over, let's just say it's a dirty place to be. There's a lot of us peeing in bottles and stuff. It is not glamorous. Hoke relies on Carruthers to get in and out of myriad inaccessible vehicles. He literally carries me around the country, said Hoke, throwing me into sprinters and 15-passenger vans and catching me as I fall out of them. After nursing a set of constantly sprained ankles thanks to rough transfers, Hoke has learned to be careful and try to grab a second person to help. It's one of the many ways the band's demanding schedule has pushed him out of his comfort zone and helped him to grow. As an example, he mentioned how he streamlined the equipment he needs to travel. There used to be things that I would absolutely not travel without. I would not go anywhere without a commode. That's when I learned on, and I'm used to. He also weaned himself off baclofen, tizanidine, and lorazepam, learning that some simple stretches and coffee are way better for his body and his busy life. Still, some realities can't be escaped, and when it comes to inaccessible venues, Hoke has learned to grin and bear it. We've had to get me on stage some crazy ways, but we always get me on stage, he says. From being carried through the crowd and lifted onto the stage to navigating narrow ramps too steep to even walk up, Hoke has seen it all. He documents each venue using his own rating system and color-coded collection of notes. Carruthers has developed a routine to assess what lies ahead. I get up every morning, grab us coffees, and I go in and scope out the venue. I'll send him a text like everything is fine or today's going to kind of suck, man. Every day is different, but what are you going to do? We haven't found a stage that we haven't got him up on yet, so it all works. Hoke laughs, recalls when retelling the all-too-common conversation the band's stage manager has with local staff. When the rare venue does have a wheelchair lift onto stage, he will oftentimes go up to a guy at a venue and be like, "I noticed you've got a lift. Does that thing work?" And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. But on the occasion that it does work, the guy's usually like, "Oh yeah, it works just fine. What do you have in mind? A bass cab or a couple of PA speakers, a drum set?" And he just shakes his head. Hoke's best accessibility story revolves around the band's unexpected win at January's Grammys. After Lady Gaga nearly tripped over his chair on the red carpet, Hoke and the band were eagerly awaiting the announcement of their category when one of the handlers approached them. "We're going to need to get you guys to take your seats at the event, and when the category, before your category comes up, we're going to sneak you guys up the side stage so that you can get up there and do your speech," he told them. Hoke remembers mentally processing what the handler's words meant. "Are you telling us? Wait, what are you telling us right now?" "Oh yeah, no, good luck," the handler shyly required. Then we got up there. Our category is coming up, and I'm looking at Paul Schaefer and the CBS Orchestra freaking out a little bit. And someone hands me a wireless microphone. "Hey, just in case you can't reach the podium mic and you want to say some words," I'm like, If this goes to anyone else right now, I'm going to burn this building down. Hoke didn't need to break out the matches. He rolled on stage with the band and became the second person with a spinal cord injury to receive a Grammy, according to the awards department. The first, none other than Christopher Reeve. He won a Grammy for Best Spoken Word Album in 1998 for his memoir, Still Me. If it wasn't already crazy enough hearing the band's music played on pop radio alongside stars like Chance the Rapper and Demi Lovato, the Grammy win catapulted the band into even more fame. "My family's a lot bigger now," jokes Hoke. "I have cousins that I haven't heard from in years and years and years." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I remember you. I haven't talked to you since I was like 6, but yeah, we're cool." It's pretty crazy. The super popular kid from high school that was never friends with me and never reached out for anything, just friend requested me on Facebook. I'm letting that hang for a bit. Still, Hoke hasn't reached the level of recognition where he gets mobbed when he goes out in public, and that is fine with him. 1 out of every 200 dudes in an airport will be wearing a Coachella t-shirt and a tie-dyed headband, and he's going to know who I am and yell, "Eric Hoke," and come running over. But by and large, none of us are really media darlings or personalities. Hoke jokingly describes Portugal the Man as 36-year-old fat Alaskan pop stars, but it is clear he is happy with the level of stardom they have attained. Instead of Mick Jagger, Hoke said he wants to be Ron Wood, the guitar playing with mystique. Borrowing a quote from Almost Famous, he says, "It's like one of the out-of-focus guys." That's exactly where I want to be, he says. I've tried fronting my own bands, and I hate it. I hate all the eyes on me kind of thing. I love sneaking in there, having my moment, and taking it for a second, and then handing it right back. I've always been just that kind of wanted to be on a team. Even now, when he is one of the most visible, successful teams in the industry, Hoke hasn't let it change him. That's what's hilarious, and that's why he's the perfect guy to have something like this happen. Because he doesn't change him at all, said Ager. He's the exact same guy he has always been. It doesn't matter if he's in a situation that's tough or easy. He's the same consistent good guy all the time. He cut his hair and he wears a jacket that I've never really seen him wear before, adds Bradford. But other than that, he's the exact same person. You send him a text, you get a response. He never talks down to you. He never pretends like anything is more important than the friendships he had going into it. While Hoke hasn't let success go to his head, it has opened new doors and brought new responsibilities, which he admits he is still trying to figure out. A tweet from one of his followers after the band's performance on national TV in last year's American Music Awards drove the matter home. At Music Queen 87 wrote, I cried when I saw you on the AMAs because I've never seen a mainstream musician in a wheelchair on TV before. It was a magical feeling. Hoke choked up on the hearing the tweet. He remembers what it was like adjusting after his injury and has said he cropped his wheelchair out of his photos for the first few years. Now, in a matter of a few months, Hoke has become one of the world's most visible musicians in a wheelchair. I mean, all of this stuff is untrodden and new territory to me, he says. The easiest and most obvious thing I think I can do is to not miss shows and have a public and visible job. I think the second that you start really trying to sell yourself as a motivating or inspiring figure, it loses some of its earnestness and genuine intent. I am still trying to figure that out. I am still trying to draw that line all the time. Hoke has embraced early opportunities to use his visibility for good, stopping in to visit newly injured people at Craig Hospital, helping with a fundraiser for March of Dimes, and recording a series of PSAs for National Telecommuting Institute, a nonprofit that helps people with disabilities find jobs. NTI has been around for 26 years, but the director of marketing, Mike Sanders, says the ads Hoke's recorded have helped the organization connect on a larger scale than normal. We're on over 400 radio stations right now, and people have been calling us up, saying that if it wasn't for Eric Hoke, if it wasn't for Portugal the Man, I wouldn't have heard of NTI. Hoke was one of the people who had never heard of NTI before connecting with Sanders, but the organization's goals especially resonating with him. A lot of their messages are things that I personally hadn't really thought of myself, and they hit home, says Hoke. If you want to work, there is a way. I was doing construction, and I pretty much threw that away the second I realized I was going to be a paraplegic. Now I realize that's ridiculous, and I'm sure I would be totally valued and useful on a work team. NTI's whole message is, what would you like to do? And here are some of the things that you could jump right into now. I think that's killer. Carruthers is proud of the way his friend and bandmate has embraced the spotlight. I don't think he realized that he could do as much or have the platform to help as many people, he says. I think he is super excited about it. When you do have a voice, you should use it. And he's used it for very good things. How Hoke decides to use that voice going forward remains to be seen, but there is no question his eyes are open and he is an articulate spokesperson for many of the issues affecting wheelchair users. If there was ever a time to get riled up and to point out some hypocrisies and not just let things take their course without shining a light on them, I think it is now, he says. Look at the number of things this administration has deemed disposable, the number of social programs that are on the chopping block, and the number of things that are going away. I think that's the biggest problem with what's happening. Things sort of gently going by the wayside, and suddenly we look around and there are no safety nets left for anyone or anything. It's terrifying. For right now, though, Hoke's eyes are focused squarely on the music and the continued success of Portugal the Man. The band is wrapping up some U.S. dates this month before heading to Europe for a month of shows. I love my job, he says. It is never really hard for me to get out of bed and do this thing. Even if the music ended and the touring was over, getting back into Portugal and into touring and all of that was vindicating. It scratched an itch I was always going to have, and I proved something to myself. I would be heartbroken if it all ended and it all went away, but I would be proud of what I was able to accomplish, and I'd be all right. Innovations by Mark E. Smith. Portable power chairs. Complex rehab power chairs are fantastic when it comes to performance and comfort, from suspension to power seating. However, among their biggest limitations is transportability. Traveling with a power chair can be challenging. However, all is not lost. There is a new generation of very affordable power chairs that can serve as a secondary travel mobility option for even those who typically use complex rehab power chairs. Redefining the will. WHILL. Will burst into the mobility market several years ago with Model A, followed by the more funding-compliant Model M. What made the Will line unique was its avant-garde look and its use of Omni wheels on the front, giving it remarkable maneuverability for a rear-wheel drive, full-size power chair. What held it back was its lack of features found on complex rehab power chairs and a staggeringly high base price. Fortunately, the Will team recognized its successes and shortcomings and dramatically changed its approach. The result is the Model C, which hits market's sweet spot. The Model C, CI, patented front Omni wheels gives the distinct advantage of eliminating swivel casters. This allows the use of a larger wheel without interfering with the user's foot placement. It also allows for extraordinary maneuverability. The Model C is about the length of a compact scooter, but due to the Omni wheels, it turns in half of the space needed to a travel scooter. This maneuverability is among the biggest benefit of the unit. From there, Will departed from its prior platform and made a slim-line design that is sleek and portable. A simple but supportive seat with a joystick and controls integrated into the armrests provide meaningful position for most users, at least for part-time use. As for portability, the frame quickly disassembles into 3 separate pieces, easily fitting into a taxi's trunk. Speeds up to 5 miles an hour and a range of 10 miles are powered by a 10Ah lithium-ion battery. Among the most groundbreaking features of the Model C are its Bluetooth connectivity with an iPhone. The app not only displays all of the chair's data, but allows the driving it via your phone remotely so you can fetch it from across the room or wherever it may be within reason. The Model C has MSRP of a mere $3,999, available through spinlife.com and other online mobility retailers. That's a lot of product for the money. So how do they do it so cost-effectively? The answer is, although it is marketed to wheelchair users, they make clear that a personal electric vehicle that has been submitted or tested as an FDA-regulated medical device. With Will's exceptional reputation, this shouldn't be a deterrent to the buyer. But it certainly has reduced the design and manufacturing costs dramatically. In all, the fantastic portable power chair at a reasonable price. Your power chair passport. A ton of inexpensive folding power chairs have been sold on the internet in recent years, mostly imported from China. All look ultralight and remarkably easy to fold, but quality and support have been questionable. Now Pride Mobility Products has entered the market with its Jazzy Passport. The complete Jazzy Passport weighs in at a scant 53 pounds, offering true portability. The key to this is how it folds. While the Jazzy Passport looks somewhat like a traditional as a rear-wheel drive power chair, the folding mechanism is a showstopper. With the release of a single latch, you simply push forward on the backrest with one hand, and the whole chair folds to the ground flat, like a lawn chair. To unfold it, you simply pull up on the backrests and it unfolds. Unlike other products in its class, nothing must be removed from the chair and it stays in one piece. It literally can be folded and stored in the trunk in under a minute. The seating is a traditional sling with armrests and high backrests along with a slight seat dump. It's quite supportive. A rehab cushion is easily fitted as well. The Jazzy Passport carries an airline-approved 18Ah lithium-ion battery, delivering a 9.6-mile range with a top speed of 3.6 miles per hour. A PG controller combined with a high-torque motors delivers impressive performance and handling. The Jazzy Passport's best attributes may be that it is among the few in the class that meets ANSI RESNA power chair standards. This means although its performance may be less than a full complex rehab power chair, its durability and safety meet the same standards. With an MSRP of $2,899 but sold online on discount sites for $1,999, the Jazzy Passport Passport is an affordable way to get into a true travel power chair and be comfortable with knowing it has the quality and service it should. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
We hope you enjoyed the Talking Information Center's presentation of The Ability Show. If you missed any part of the program or would like to listen to it again, please visit our website at ticnetwork.org.
Each day in America, nearly 10,000 people turn 65 years old. With a population of approximately 15 million, New England lays claim to the largest percentage of baby boomers in the country. Many of these individuals are living with acquired disabilities, though they may not readily identify as having a disability, and they may not realize that their rights are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. Since 1990, the ADA has supported a broad range of individuals to live full, meaningful lives in the community. New England ADA Center works closely with those with rights and those with responsibilities to implement the ADA. For more information, contact us today at newenglandada.org, a project of the Institute for Human-Centered Design.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod to the Berkshires.
This is volunteer reader David Brandt, broadcasting from Lowell, Massachusetts. Stay tuned for more coming your way next.
WRRS Middleborough, Pittsfield, WVBF Middleborough, WDJM Framingham, WUML Lowell, WLLO Londonderry.
Up next from the Talking Information Center, it's the weekend review of the Wall Street Journal. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, this is Melissa here to read the weekend review of the Wall Street Journal for July 28th and 29th. Zap that possum's genes? Localities want a say. CRISPR technology may allow scientists to change the environment forever, but working with affected communities presents a challenge. By Amy Doxer Marcus. In recent years, scientists have begun using the gene editing tool CRISPR to experiment in the laboratory with altering embryos and changing the DNA of animals. But the consequences of using the technology outside the lab are hard to predict and potentially enormous. As a result, a worldwide debate is underway about how much say ordinary citizens should have over the use of CRISPR in their communities. Earlier this month, Richard Johnson, a biologist who runs the Martha's Vineyard Tick-Borne Illness Reduction Initiative, attended a discussion of mice against ticks, an ambitious project working on using the CRISPR gene editing tool to create mice resistant to the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. Someday, the genetically engineered mice might be released on Martha's Vineyard and neighboring island Nantucket, where they could breed with the local mice and pass on the immunity to their offspring. Ticks that feed on the mice would not become infected, so they would not transmit the pathogen to humans, lowering the incidence of the disease. Mr. Johnson believes that the scientists can find a way to make the disease-resistant mice. For him, it's the ethical and political questions about the project that are hard to answer. Should the scientists do it, and who gets to decide? CRISPR, which stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats, isn't the first new technology to pose such complicated questions. But CRISPR offers the potential to control evolution and change future species, says biochemist Kevin Esfeld, an assistant professor at the Cambridge, Massachusetts-based MIT Media Lab, where Mice Against Ticks was born. CRISPR is the immune system of bacteria. Scientists adapted CRISPR and the Cas9 enzyme that it produces to serve as a tool to edit DNA in plants, animals, and humans. Researchers soon realized that CRISPR might be used not only to edit or repair genes of people living with diseases, but also to edit embryos, changing the DNA of future generations. It could also be used to create a so-called gene drive, spreading engineered genetic changes through populations of wild animals, but also altering the environment in unpredictable ways. With so much at stake, Dr. Esvelt says scientists must not make such decisions by themselves. At the event on Martha's Vineyard, Dr. Esvelt recounted how, historically, scientists often develop new technologies behind closed doors, without meaningful input from the people most likely to be affected by their use. By the time the public was asked to weigh in, he said, it was usually too late to influence the direction of the science. With CRISPR, Dr. Esvelt and his collaborators see an opportunity to take a different approach, a chance not just to do powerful science, but to test new ways of discussing and deploying it. They found that when scientists and communities work together, there can be unexpected consequences. Last year, a group of academics invited Dr. Esvelt to attend a workshop they were holding in New Zealand to discuss, among other things, the possible use of gene drives as a tool in conservation. New Zealand has launched an ambitious plan to rid the country of predators such as rats, stoats, and possums that have decimated native flora and fauna. CRISPR is one of the technologies that offers a potential solution. Dr. Esvelt gave a presentation about his research on a form of CRISPR gene drive that he is developing called a DAISY drive. He thinks that the DAISY drive is potentially a safer technology than a standard CRISPR gene drive because the changes are engineered to be passed on only for a limited number of generations, not to spread indefinitely. The concept has not yet been tested in a field trial. Among the people Dr. Esvelt met in New Zealand were members of the Te Tira Whakamataki, or the Maori Biosecurity Network, a group of Maori elders, academics, tribal leaders, and others interested in ensuring that the Maori have a voice in biodiversity issues. Melanie Mark Shadbolt, CEO of the network, says that they liked Dr. Esvelt's idea of co-developing research and new technologies with community input. We want to be active participants in research, not subjects, she says. Shortly after the visit, Dr. Esvelt and a New Zealand collaborator, Neil J. Jamal, of the University of Otago, published a paper in the journal PLOS Biology, laying out their concerns about the potential environmental consequences of standard CRISPR gene drives. The paper caused a backlash, say researchers in New Zealand, because some felt that the authors implied that the actual use of gene drives in New Zealand was imminent rather than hypothetical. Ms. Mark Shadbolt felt blindsided. When he met with us, he should have said, "There's a paper coming out that talks about New Zealand and conversations I am having about gene drives. Would you like to take a look?" she says. Dr. Esvelt took the criticism to heart, and in January issued a public apology on his own blog and in Medium. He agreed that he should have offered the Maori a chance to make suggestions while the paper was being revised. Reflecting on the experience, he says, "I made the same mistake with respect to the local political environment that we're hoping to avoid with the natural environment. Our lack of understanding leading to unwanted side effects." On Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket, Dr. Esvelt's plan for community partnership has been on surer footing so far. Even there, however, the outcome is not certain. Regulatory approval is not enough, the scientists believe. They also have promised not to release the genetically altered mice without approval from the communities. This prospect is still years away, but Carrie Filer, a biology teacher at the public high school in Martha's Vineyard, and one of the representatives on the Mice Against Ticks steering committee, says that some wonder what a vote on the issue might look like. Would 51% be enough to move forward, or would it require everyone to agree? As she says, you can't have a single town opting out because mice don't know town lines and will cross them. At the meeting in Martha's Vineyard in July, one of the ethicists pointed out that discussions about whether or not to use a scientific advance often turn on assessments of potential risks and benefits. Perhaps, the ethicist suggested, the quality of public engagement and depth of community involvement in making decisions should also be considered. On every seat at the meeting was a pamphlet that Dr. Filer's students had created to explain ticks and tick-borne illness in language that they and their parents could understand. Dr. Filer says that she reminded her students, whatever happens, it won't be the scientists determining what will happen, it will be us. A certain idea of France. From the moment he became a voice for freedom during World War II, de Gaulle embodied the Gallic spirit in his time. This is a review of the book De Gaulle by Julian Jackson, 887 pages. The reviewer is Richard Norton Smith, a historian and biographer who is currently at work on a life of Gerald R. Ford. There can be no prestige without mystery, de Gaulle insisted, for familiarity breeds contempt. Nearly half a century after his death, de Gaulle's prestige has never been greater. Forgetting how divisive a figure he was in his life, as evidenced by the nearly 30 assassination attempts he survived, Frenchmen across the political spectrum ranked Le Grand Charles above Napoleon, Clemenceau, and the Sun King himself. In 1940, de Gaulle redeemed French honor by carrying on the war against Hitler, not from occupied France, but from makeshift battle stations in London and Equatorial Africa. Before and after liberation, he battled apologists for the quisling Vichy regime of Marshal Philippe Pétain, as well as French communists loyal to Moscow. In May 1958, he came out of a restless retirement to avert civil war over colonial Algeria. Later that year, he established the Fifth Republic, tailored to his contempt for party politicians like former French President Albert Lebrun, 1932-40, of whom he observed, "What he lacked as head of state was that he was no head and there was no state." Insisting France is not really herself unless in the front rank, in the 1960s, de Gaulle elbowed his way into the select club of nuclear powers, even as he relinquished an empire and rebranded France a credible champion of Third World interests. Identifying Russian nationalism as a greater threat than Soviet communism, he warned John Kennedy against a Vietnam quagmire. He recognized Mao's China nearly a decade before Nixon, an unabashed admirer, set foot in Beijing. Nixon's countrymen showed less appreciation of the aging autocrat in the Élysée Palace. To most Americans in '69, de Gaulle was the personification of French pride, a nationalistic relic who had withdrawn his country from NATO's military structure, vetoed British membership in the European Economic Community, and encouraged Quebecois separatism while on Canadian soil. Such behavior kept de Gaulle center stage in his twilight years. Equally important, it sustained an exaggerated view of French power and influence. De Gaulle as illusionist. The theme pervades Julian Jackson's doorstopper of a biography. A British historian noted for his volumes on the 1940 fall of France and the ensuing period of collaboration and resistance, Mr. Jackson sets out to demythologize the general without debunking him. With a fluent style and near-total command of existing and newly available sources, he peers behind the monolithic facade to unmask a composite of opposing traits. The lifelong soldier with a gift for insubordination, the fervent nationalist and champion of Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, the modernizer who could surpass any student protester in his disdain for the civilization of the termite heap. Born in 1890, de Gaulle was the son of a Jesuit-trained academic wounded in the Franco-Prussian War, and a mother passionately attached to church and crown. Young Charles was educated in Catholic schools before enrolling at Saint-Cyr, the National Military Academy. Wounded in the opening days of World War I, he spent much of the war as a German prisoner, making no fewer than 5 escape attempts. At 6'4", he was a hostage in his own body. "We giants are never at ease with others," he ruefully acknowledged to a wartime aide. His ungainly physical stature contributed to de Gaulle's natural shyness, a reserve that was mirrored by Yvonne von Dreux, the biscuit maker's daughter he married in 1921. Her husband passed the interwar years in a variety of teaching positions, instructing the officer corps of the new Polish army, lecturing on military history at Saint-Cyr, and writing books on French military doctrine and the self-denying requirements of command. In between tours of duty in the Rhineland and the Middle East, he gained a reputation for challenging official dogma. Given the opportunity to test his advanced theories of battlefield mobility and tank warfare against Nazi invaders, de Gaulle could not wean a fossilized military establishment from its defensive outlook. As a junior minister in the short-lived government of Paul Reynaud, March to June 1940, he rejected the council of diffused generals who far outranked him. What is remarkable about de Gaulle in 1940 is not so much his intellectual analysis of the future of the war, Mr. Jackson asserts, as his readiness to act, beginning on the evening of June 18th, when the rebellious one-star general lit the flame of French resistance in a little-heard BBC radio appeal. 4 minutes long, the founding text of Gaullism was initially vetoed by the British cabinet, which hoped to forestall an armistice between the Nazi victors in Paris and the vassal ministry headed by Marshal Pétain. De Gaulle's speech, Mr. Jackson writes, offered a diagnosis, a prediction, an appeal, and a message. The diagnosis: France's defeat was a purely military affair caused by the superiority of German armaments and tactics. The prediction: the defeat of French forces was not definitive, since France still had an empire. She had an ally in the form of Britain, and behind both was the United States. The appeal: I, General de Gaulle, currently in London, invite the officers and French soldiers who are located in British territory to contact me. The message: the flame of French resistance must not be extinguished and will not be extinguished. The original broadcast was thought too insignificant to preserve for posterity. Many listeners, then and later, assumed de Gaulle to be a pseudonym. In July 1940, Churchill ordered the destruction of the French fleet rather than risk having it fall into Nazi hands. A despondent de Gaulle considered withdrawing to Canada as a private citizen. 2 months later, the repulse of a hastily planned joint expedition at Dakar, a Vichy stronghold in West Africa, led the leader of Free France to contemplate suicide. All his life, de Gaulle battled military melancholy, part of the price for willing himself to be that man of character to whom his bleeding country would turn in times of crisis. Hidden from the world was the loving devotion and playful forbearance de Gaulle reserved for his daughter Anne, whom he called my joy and my strength. Born with Down syndrome, she died of pneumonia in 1948, aged 20. Leaving the village churchyard the day of her funeral, de Gaulle clutched his wife's hand. "Come," he reportedly said to the grieving mother, "now she is like the others." That is something he could never be. Of course, he was insufferable. The arrogance that makes him from time to time almost impossible to deal with is the reverse side of an extreme sensibility, wrote British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, no stranger to emotional concealment. He belongs to the race of unhappy and tortured souls to whom life will never be a pleasure to be enjoyed, but an arid desert through which the pilgrim must struggle. But what a pilgrimage! The initial trickle of recruits who answered his radio call was soon freshened by a parade of French colonies from Chad to Tahiti. His growing prestige helped de Gaulle negotiate the Byzantine corridors of resistance politics, while also claiming for Free France a status unjustified by its military contributions alone. More illusions, however adeptly stage-managed. Of all his World War II contemporaries, none achieved so much with fewer resources or more disputed claims to legitimacy. They commanded armies, received deference, governed at the head of existing institutions. De Gaulle's authority, like Free France itself, was largely the product of one man's imagination and still more his intransigence. After one especially rancorous confrontation with his prickly ally, Churchill marveled, "His country has given up fighting. He himself is a refugee, and if we turn him down he is finished. Well, just look at him. He might be Stalin with 200 divisions behind him." By contrast, Churchill's American counterpart, Roosevelt, spent much of the war auditioning substitute saviors less inclined to bite the hand that fed them. In November of 42, de Gaulle went into a rage when Eisenhower's armies invaded North Africa without the U.S. informing him in advance. "I hope the Vichy people throw them back into the sea." Only with difficulty could he be persuaded to broadcast a message of solidarity the day that Allied troops set foot on the beaches of Normandy. That de Gaulle's political judgment could be erratic was demonstrated in January 46. 16 months after he strode down the Champs-Élysées to cheers of liberated Paris, he abandoned his provisional government rather than cede power to the despised regime of parties. He misgauged the popular appetite for his subsequent return, as wartime memories yielded to fears of dictatorship, and the parliamentary games resumed under the guise of the Fourth Republic, 1946 to 58, in which economic and social gains were purchased at the cost of ministerial stability. Retreating to his austere country house at Colombey-les-Deux Églises, de Gaulle wrote his memoirs and scorned all recognition from his successors in Paris. One does not decorate France. From 1947 to 55, he maintained an awkward oversight of the Rally of the French People, RPF, the Rally of the French People, memorably described by the New York Times as a party against parties. Then he again left the stage, only to reappear 3 years later when a French army employing brutal tactics proved unable to suppress the violent uprising of native Algerians demanding independence. Mr. Jackson's meticulous reconstruction of the tumultuous month of May 1958 and the decolonizing policies that followed de Gaulle's return to power constitute the most overtly revisionist parts of his story. He shows us a Machiavellian exile flirting with a right-wing army officers whose commitment to Algérie Française exceeded their allegiance to Republican government, while simultaneously flattering socialist parliamentarians whose support he would need to reclaim power. His pursuit of an Algerian peace was pure pragmatism, spurred by fears of a French army increasingly self-absorbed and tainted by treason. The resulting wound was not easily cauterized. In April of 61, de Gaulle crushed a revolt led by extremist generals. The following year, terrorists belonging to the paramilitary OAS, Algeria is French and will remain so, came within inches of killing the hero who had betrayed their cause. De Gaulle's ultimate achievement, Mr. Jackson argues, was less to have granted Algeria independence than to have persuaded people that that is what he had done. To create a compelling narrative that explained France's disengagement from Algeria and turned it into a victory rather than a defeat. No wonder Richard Nixon would draw on his example a decade later in fashioning the strategic retreat he called Vietnamization. Freed to pursue grandeur on the world stage, de Gaulle undertook triumphal tours through Africa, Latin America, and Asia, presenting France as a civilized alternative to soulless capitalism and socialist tyranny. He cultivated West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, cut off French arms sales to Israel, and denounced the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in August 1968. De Gaulle's personal frugality contrasted sharply with the splendor of his public stewardship. As First Lady of France, Madame de Gaulle did her own marketing, while the couple insisted on paying their personal electric bills at the Élysée Palace. Others were less willing to forego the fruits of 1960s consumerism. Through a vaguely conceived policy of association, de Gaulle hoped to narrow the gap between the working class and their employers. Then came May 1968 and the far more radical demands of French students, soon echoed by the country's powerful unions. Never had the old man seemed so out of touch. On May 29, 1968, his grip on events fading fast, de Gaulle disappeared to a French military base on German soil. Even now, his movements during those frantic 24 hours are